very primal and simple and pristine, and you feel like you've gone back in time. You know that no one's been here. You know that very few people have ever seen what you're seeing. And when you're hiking, you know it's very possible that no one has walked where you've walked. That's how few people have been in the refuge, and it's so large that it's very possible that no one has stepped where you've stepped. No human has stepped where you have stepped, and that's a really cool feeling. When I was 15 years old, I spent 6.5 weeks in Alaska on a trip run by a company called Expeditions for Global Awareness. The purpose of the trip was for young people to learn about the effects of oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. 3.5 weeks we spent actually in the refuge, hiking and kayaking and camping, of course, in the refuge. The river that we used on our kayak portion of the trip was the Canning River, which is the western boundary of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and runs to the Beaufort Sea. We had about a week and a half at the end of the trip where we were in Fairbanks again, had everyone's pictures developed from their negatives and then onto slides. As a group, we chose the slides that we thought best represented the trip, and so we created a slideshow from that. And we were to take that slideshow to local civic organizations, to schools, to decision makers, and give our slide presentation, talk about our trip, and talk about the effects of oil drilling in Alaska. 1.5 million acres at the northernmost point of the refuge, the coastal plain that runs along the ocean, was not designated as wilderness. It's not protected. It has been named the 1002 area, and it is the area that oil companies and scientists believe may hold the potential for more oil. As an adult, I've given the slideshow a few times because it's still an issue. This has not been resolved, and that land that was in danger when I was 15 is still in danger, and maybe even in greater danger now, given the state of the world. The porcupine caribou herd is a huge herd of caribou that migrate from Canada into Alaska every year. They come to that little chunk of Alaska I showed you earlier. That's where they come to have their babies. So one of the concerns about oil drilling is if we decide to drill in the National Wildlife Refuge, people are concerned that that will interfere with the place where these caribou come every year for hundreds and hundreds of years. They've been coming here to have their babies and to raise their young before the winter. Just west of the Anwar is an area called Prudhoe Bay. That's a very large oil drilling facility. It's the largest producer of domestic oil in our country. The trip left Fairbanks for Prudhoe Bay, and it was a very long drive up to Prudhoe Bay, and we followed basically the Trans-Alaska Pipeline from that area all the way up to Prudhoe Bay, crossed the Arctic Circle, and stayed in a small hotel at Prudhoe Bay. We toured the drilling facilities. We were guided by PR people, really, that told us what drilling was about, how it worked, and how great pains have been taken to protect the environment. Not too far under the ground is a layer of ice, basically what it is. And it's called permafrost. Permafrost. So perma meaning permanent and frost, ice, right?
Frozen.
Right. It's frozen all the time. So because it's frozen all the time, when we build a house here in McIntosh County, it's like a house on stilts and stuff, and even a slab house, you have to dig a foundation, right? You've seen that happen. Or sometimes people put big posts down in the ground to hold their houses up. We can't do that because you get into the permafrost layer, and then the warmth of the sun and the warmth of the earth gets down in there, the ice melts, and then what do you think happens when the ice melts?
The road rises.
Yeah, well, yeah, that and the whole ground becomes unstable. So your house will be all messed up. So in order to make that not happen, what they do, you can see sort of in the picture, see it's all gravel? They actually build up piles of gravel so that they can build structures on top. That makes sense? So they can't build in, so they put something on top. That's how they keep from going to the permafrost layer. So that's why you'll see everything in Prudhoe Bay that you see, all the pictures, everything's going to be gravel. That's all the roads, all the buildings. It's almost like everything's sitting on a pad of gravel. And that's all well and good. I mean, I guess the permafrost isn't being destroyed and all of that. But the question is, when they're finished drilling, when they've taken all the oil that there is, when those wells dry up and they move on, what happens to all of that gravel? They were telling us that they were just going to pick up and go. They could clean it all up, and they would pick it up, and they would remediate, and it would be left to the animals again once it wasn't useful anymore. But when we were there, we noticed, and I have pictures of this, and I have journal writings about this, that there's garbage everywhere, just piles of trash and trash on the roads, and places where discarded boxes and crates and tires and pieces of machinery looked like they had been dumped into piles, just big junkyard looking places. And the question I asked then, and I'm still curious about, is if you're not cleaning up while you're there, if you're not cleaning up your trash when you're there, I would be really surprised to see you clean it up after you're gone and there's nothing more for you there. We landed on small gravel runways right along the riverbed, and that's when the expedition part of the trip began. I just felt very small. That was my first, and it was very quiet. There was no noise, there was no humming of electronics, no cars, no planes, no music, and so it was very quiet and open, so you could see for miles, and the sky seemed bigger than at home. It seemed like you could feel you were near the top of the world, that when you looked up, like you could feel that the atmosphere was curved and there was a dome above your head. I broke into 2 groups of 10, and the groups traveled separately in order to reduce the amount of impact on the land. The tundra, the environment up there, but especially the tundra that we were walking on, is very fragile land, and the impact even just walking on it is quite a bit of impact. That land, that tundra, the lichen, the wildflowers, those things are only alive for a few months out of the year. So killing them with a footstep has a major impact. This truck is designed to be able to drive across the tundra. Remember the mushy thing I showed you? So this is designed to be able to drive across it without damaging it. The 1002 area is a relatively small area of the entire Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It is about 1.5 million acres, which is close to 2,300 square miles of land. But it's such a critical part. It's not a piece that you can take away and not affect the ecology of the entire refuge. There are layers through the refuge and coming from the coastal plain, from the water to the foothills to the mountains. And by taking up a big part of that, you're going to affect the balance of the entire refuge. There's no way you can come in and say, we're going to reduce impact. We have technology. We can do this in a way that just doesn't really impact the environment as much as you would think. Any impact is great in this area. And for 2 reasons. One, because it's Arctic and it's tundra, and it's very fragile. And two, because it's never been touched before. It's in its pristine state. It's in the state that it's been forever. And to change that, you will change it forever. "15 years later, when I had the means to return to Alaska, I went back with my family. The reason I wanted to go back was, well, there were a few reasons. One reason was just to see Alaska in areas I hadn't seen yet, and the other was to get into the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge again. It was a pleasure trip, and it was also a return to an old friend, going back to see her and see how she's doing. We flew into Fort Yukon from Fairbanks, and we flew from Fort Yukon into the refuge. The flight in made me very nervous. It was small. We were over the mountains, and I just had thought about all these movies I'd seen about small planes slamming into mountain ranges, and so that was hard. But it was gorgeous and really foreboding, almost like a big privacy fence, a big fence blocking off the refuge from the rest of the world. It was amazing in how ferocious it looked from the air. When we crested that and I saw the area that I had spent the time in before, it was beautiful, and it looked just like it had. And we brought the plane down and were able to fly a little bit lower. And so I was able to see the tundra and the riverbeds, the way that they wind. And we saw quite a few animals as well from the air that day. When I went back to the refuge, when I went back and landed in basically the same area, the same environment that I had landed the first time, I thought, this is the most amazing place that there is. And it is such a shame. It's such a shame that more people can't see it. On the other hand, the fewer people that are there, the more likely it is to maintain its beauty, and it's just, it's perfectly simple beauty. The first thing that struck me once the engine shut down and the plane had stopped settling and clicking was, again, that silence, how quiet it is there. It's a quiet that is heavy and sort of lays on you, and almost like a big blanket over your head. Very, very quiet and very large. You can feel the vastness of where you are. And you know, just from your senses, that there is nothing for miles and miles in every direction. This is one of the few pure wilderness, untouched areas on the planet, not just in our country, not just in the United States, but on this planet. And it represents an environment that is very unique. It is the last piece of undeveloped land of its kind. And if we open this up to drilling, if we allow the desecration of this land, then no land is safe from desecration.